Chapter 3, Newbury Street. With the family reunion taking priority their whole summer, the two girls were left with nothing else to do for the rest of vacation. Paddy left for New Jersey for school, and both Grimes' parents weren't home often, leaving the house much quieter than before. But Betty never complained. As long as she was home, she was happy. Betty and Thorny explored the forest, played Beast and Hunt and other board games, and even helped Ginetta cook and bake. But most days, Betty spent alone, drawing. After completing Perphicephus, her motivation soared. She drew birds, plants, and even their Ford station wagon, and repeated them on new parchment, perfecting the line weight, strokes, and details, each revision drastically building up from the other. It wasn't long till her desk and floor were riddled with her work. They looked impressive. If she continued like this, perhaps she might become the best artist in the country, or even the world if she was willing to. On a sunny afternoon, both Betty and her sister, along with Ginetta and Frobot, travelled back to the beach they first visited with their dad earlier that week, dressed in their swimsuits. The girls, along with their Jarvie, played with the waves that crashed on the shores. Betty quickly got bored after a few minutes and decided to lay on the sand. Looking up at the bright afternoon sky, she thought about school. It was only a week away and she wasn't sure if she should feel excited or worried. Betty and her family would go shopping for school supplies at Roverthord Mall in Boston. She'd see her friends from Zaha's Academy again, Pearl, Gabrielle, Paisley, and Cassandra. They were all going to Thermadore except for Cassandra. She was the only one who got accepted to Ilvermorny, to her great luck. A large splash of water suddenly landed on top of Betty's face, nearly drowning her. "Thorny!" Ginetta yelled, standing up from a beach chair. Thorny ignored and continued bombarding Betty. Betty quickly lifted herself up and splashed back. Ginetta, seeing the war that had broken out between the two, quickly ran after them on the shore, lifting her dress as she walked barefoot towards them. "Girls! You want me to get your mother involved?" Betty was the first up on Monday morning. She enjoyed a bowl of cereal while reading a book on drawing techniques. Ginetta later joined her on the table with a cup of coffee. Ginetta stared at the book cover. Drawing Done Right, an intermediate-level, comprehensive guide to realistic drawing. "Is it helping?" she said. Betty peeked from the top of the book. "Yeah, actually." "Good to hear. You think you're able to make a portrait of my son? I want to surprise him." "I haven't learned to draw people yet, but I promise to draw him first when I get there." "You're too kind, Betty," Ginetta said sweetly. Betty beamed. The rest of the family eventually joined them not long after. They all came into the kitchen shocked to see Betty, as she normally was the last one up. But there was a reason she was up before them. She didn't want to miss out on her friends. If she could experience fun at least one more time until school starts, she wouldn't take any risks. "You're off tomorrow as well, Dad," Betty said to her father. He looked down at her. "I wish I could see you girls in your new uniforms, but unfortunately I'll be at the office." "I could try them the night before I leave for school," Betty said. Father Grimes smiled. "Sounds like a date." They approached the detached garage not far from the cobblestone path to their home. The garage doors opened, revealing the black Ford station wagon. The vehicle had a thin layer of dust all over its dark surface. "Eris, enter!" Father Grimes yelled while gesturing with his wand. A giant gust of wind flew, creating a turbulence in the garage. The caked layer of dust seemingly wafted out of existence, leaving pristine black, but it also blew garden equipment, mulch and winter shovels to the ground. "Oops!" he reacted. They entered the vehicle, Father Grimes on the driver's seat while Betty sat in the back, pitched over the front bench seat, gazing through the windshield. The car roared to life and rolled to the courtyard. Thorny and Ginetta stood properly at the doorstep, while Mother Grimes bent down to adjust Thorny's collar on her red dress. As the car came to a stop, they approached and entered the vehicle. "You're coming?" Betty said, staring excitedly at Ginetta. Ginetta smiled. "Of course. I wouldn't miss picking out your school outfit." The car exited through the wrought iron gates and they made their way right on the two-lane road. As they drove, Father Grimes stared carefully through the rear-view mirrors and windshield to make sure they were alone. "Attention passengers, as we depart we urge—" "Oh, stop it, Frankie." Mother Grimes interrupted. "Sorry, Vivian, up we go then." The vehicle lifted up. An endless sea of grey welcomed them above the surface as they soared high in the sky. Soon, all of New York was visible, not as interesting with the sun hidden, but still a sight to see. The car headed north, following the Hudson River. "Hope we make it on time," Betty said while looking at her watch. As the Boston skyline appeared at the edge of the horizon, Father Grimes initiated the descent to a lone 2-lane road headed straight for the city. Reaching downtown, they parked at an obscure neighborhood. The skyline towered not far from where they were. The rest of the journey was on foot as Father Grimes led them with a map through the no-match streets. "Franklin, we've been here before," Mother Grimes said. "Why the map?" "Never parked here, so don't exactly know where we are." He continued down a road with the map so close to his face. At moments he was oblivious to his surroundings, nearly hitting lampposts, mailboxes and even some no-majors. Luckily, Mother Grimes was there to push him out of the way. Betty had never seen her mother look so angry before. "It should be around here." They approached a large, bustling avenue where red brick townhomes flanked both sides, while older, lighter-coloured buildings occasionally obstructed the uniformity. "Oh, now I know where we are," Janetta reacted. "I always apparate there." She pointed at a tree pot near the centre of the avenue. They made their way through the crowd, keeping close. Betty glimpsed at passing shops. The non-magic world amused her. It was astonishing to see shops that solved problems she didn't know were problems. Restaurants and food stores staffed wholly by themselves and entertainment that looked primitive compared to theirs. But Betty was more astounded by the prevalence of women and girls casually wearing pants. "Right here." Father Grimes directed the group to a shop among others on their right. "Here?" Betty reacted. She gazed up at the shop. "Hernandez Records." Its font was striking and multicoloured while grey paint peeled off the walls. The front windows were very underwhelming compared to the other shops, displaying no-maj albums. The family stepped up the stairs into the tiny shop. There was not much room for all of them, as it was nearly taken up by thousands of albums displayed in aisles, trays and on walls. There was a short line between the aisles of people waiting at the cashier. No-maj photographs looked fascinating to Betty. She enjoyed how creative they were, even if they were limited to still photos. "A family crest?" Betty grabbed a white album from the tray. It looked like a crest. 2 lions and fairies held up a large oval of nothing. On top of the oval stood a fire, and above that, a swan with open wings covering the creatures below, all in front a white background. "This song comes from another family, Dad," Betty said to her father, who was waiting in line. "Shh, Betty." Mother Grimes swiftly took the album and placed it back in its tray. She then nudged Betty into line with the others. "Good day, sir," the cashier said with a smile. Father Grimes smiled back, then cleared his throat. "I'm looking for something not overwhelming but still exciting. I'm thinking concrete, halls, and secrets." The cashier nodded as though he completely understood the nonsense. "You're looking for the Roverthord album. I can check in the back. You all want to come?" Betty felt her mother move her forward. They all followed the cashier through a narrow opening at the right. Betty noticed the people in line behind them looking at them oddly. They must be no-maj. They shuffled through boxes, jackets and cleaning equipment to reach the end of the narrow opening, where a metal door stood across from them. The cashier opened it and bowed. "Enjoy them all, sir and ma'ams," the cashier said as they went through. The door closed behind, leaving them in darkness. Torches then lit up, revealing a narrow hallway that led to stairs going upwards and curving left. "Right this way," Father Grimes said, climbing up the stairs. The torches were pitched on indented sections of the cobblestone walls on their right, revealing the thin stairs as they climbed. Their shoes and boots clacked and echoed on the hard steps. Eventually, bright grey near the top overpowered the torches. The sound of water streaming echoed in the curved stairway. They found themselves on a large courtyard, drenched with grey from a massive skylight exposing the sky. Although faint, the frame of the glass roof exposed a grid pattern on the pale pink floor tiles. Staring back, Betty saw the stairs had curved around the foundation of a large fountain. She then looked around. It was a monastery of pink and dark green, shops of all kinds on both ends of the wall, these ones much more familiar than the ones on the No-Maj Avenue. And also familiar, wizards and witches and children roaming the shops and open corridors around them, holding bags and treats, passing by them with a smile. The stairs surrounding the fountain then moved up until they levelled with the floor. "Well then," Father Grimes initiated, "where do we start?" The group split into two. Thorny went with the parents while Betty went with Janetta. Though the separation was planned before they entered the mall, it was quite obvious to Betty why she'd be left with their maid. "Which shop was it?" Betty asked Janetta. The maid looked around. "Let's see, right here, avian attire." It wasn't as amusing as Betty thought it would be. Grey roof tiles mixed with dull lighting and black glossy floors, but the clothes on sale looked out of place, almost resembling the attire worn by the No-Maj. Has her family gone out of fashion? The witches around them looked not much different than them. She then noticed the nice silky multicoloured jackets, black shirts and turquoise pants that complemented the glistening silver boots displayed at the front. Perhaps pants were going into style, and the No-Maj caught on before them. "Does this work?" a store staffer said, adjusting Betty's white collar shirt. She stood on a platform, surrounded by a golden curtain while Janetta peeked from a seam. Betty struggled to move. As she did, she felt a tickling sensation which made her giggle. "I think it's too tight," she uttered. "Okay, try this on then." The staff member handed her another white shirt. It didn't look as silky as the other, a bit more baggy, but much more comfortable. As she attached the last button, she didn't feel the neck-grabbing sensation anymore. "It's good." She then twirled, staring at herself through the mirror as her head passed. "It's really good." Eventually, with the generous support of Janetta, Betty had her full school attire on. Black box pleats, white shirt, white socks and black tie. All that was missing was black shoes and her school robes. "I guess I'm ready for school." Janetta smiled. "You just look like Paddy on her first day." She then approached the store staff member. "We'll buy a dozen of each." Exploring the mall, they ticked up school supplies, textbooks, personal items and even accessories that complemented Betty's uniform. Janetta even purchased, with her own dragons, 5 new plastic headbands for Betty, including one in leopard print. Betty doubted she'd wear them, but she did appreciate the gesture. Nearly reaching the end of the parchment list Janetta held in her coat pocket, there were now a dozen bags orbiting around them. "And we're done, Betty," Janetta said, looking at the school list. "Thank you, Janetta," Betty said, hugging her. "Can I go look for my friends now?" Janetta smiled. "Looks like you won't have to." There was a sudden shriek behind Betty. 4 girls ran towards them. Betty screamed back while running at them. They embraced each other with such ferocity, it tumbled all 5 of them on the floor. "Careful, girls," Janetta reacted. They all got up and hugged again. "Why were you hiding from me?" Betty said. "You're hiding from us," the tallest blonde said back. "It's so good to see you, Betty," another blonde in the group said. Betty smiled. "Good to see you guys too." "I'll be with your parents, Betty," Janetta said from behind. "Hey, Janetta!" 3 of the 4 girls yelled at her. Janetta waved back. "Come on!" The tall blonde then pulled all them in her direction. "I've heard the Gunthers are here and we have to find them." They went on and on, catching up to the things missed in letters they've sent to each other throughout the summer. Betty's family reunion was not the most intriguing story among them. "They actually met your parents at your house?" the brunette said to the tallest blonde friend. "Yes, but I was in Cancun at the time," the tall blonde said disappointedly. "But if they're here right now, I'll take my chances. I want to see August." They continued in joyous moods as they strided down the pale pink and beige hall amidst prying eyes and the smell of stale popcorn. Betty couldn't help but smile as she stared from both sides. Pearl was the tallest of them all and resembled the closest to her sisters, though her darker blue eyes weren't as striking as theirs. Then there was Gabriel, the other blonde besides Betty. She still looked as though she barely reached 11. If anyone looked cute among them, it was her. Paisley was endowed with deep ruby red hair. It almost didn't look natural, but she insisted it was. The rest of her family didn't have such hair as Betty remembered. Paisley was also Betty's closest friend among the others, but she didn't want to admit that to them. Then there was Cassandra, lucky Cassandra. She was the less interesting of the group, as Pearl puts it. A reserved brunette who received constant ridicule from the others for her glasses. But she wasn't receiving ridicule now. Being the only one who got accepted for transfer to Ilvermorny, they all envied her, and unfortunately for them, she noticed. "How is Thorny feeling, Betty?" Cassandra asked. "She can't stop bragging," Betty responded. "Of course she's bragging. Who wouldn't be?" Pearl added. "Glad to hear she's excited," Cassandra said. She then grabbed Betty's shoulder. "I'll make sure to watch over her for you." "But guys, what about Thermadore?" Paisley said. "What about it?" Pearl reacted. "Aren't you excited to go?" All the girls stopped and stared at the lone redhead. "You really prefer Thermadore over Ilvermorny?" Pearl reacted. Paisley, stunned, looked at each one of them. "Well, we're going there, aren't we not?" Pearl moved closer to Paisley, giving her eyes of sympathy. "Paisley, I know your family has gone there for many generations." "Only up to my grandpa," Paisley said irritably. "But this is Ilvermorny we're talking about. Nothing beats it, not even your precious Thermadore. You know that." Paisley scoffed. "And yet you're not even going there." She then pushed herself past the four others and walked, showing no signs of stopping. "I don't understand her problem," Pearl added, staring after her. "I mean, her whole family loves Thermadore, but it doesn't mean she could stuff it all in our faces." Eventually, the girls caught up to Paisley, who had forgiven them. In truth, Paisley was more upset with Pearl and her remarks, but that was soon resolved too. It was easy for Paisley to forgive simple-minded people. After an hour of walking and talking, they found themselves in a more densely packed area of the mall. "Betty, your family!" Gabriel pointed out amongst the crowd. Their dark attire always stood out. Betty's mother was crouched down, attending to Thorny. "Why is she crying?" Gabriel said. "Don't know." Betty squinted. There stood her younger sister, standing stiffly as crocodile tears jettisoned off her face while her mum attempted with a handkerchief to wipe the snot off her nose. "Maybe she didn't get something she wanted," Betty remarked. "Oh, look!" Pearl yelled, pointing at a large retail area. A large crowd emerged around the entrance, all waiting for something, or someone. The girls ran towards the crowd. "It can't be," Pearl reacted. "No way," Cassandra added. As they reached the outskirts of the crowd, they soon found themselves limited in height. "Here on the bench," Gabriel directed. The 5 girls followed and stood on top with their heads high above the crowd. "It's really them," Pearl reacted. 3 black-haired individuals came out of the one shop. The crowd gently cheered as they appeared, the girls especially. A tall woman in a bright velvet gown walked out first, her blue eyeshadow exaggerating her face of discontent. She guided the other 2 with one hand while playing with the pink pearls on her bracelet. Right behind her, a younger girl followed. She looked roughly around Paddy's age. Her expression mimicked the woman in front. The last one was a boy. He had scruffy hair as though it had never been attended by a barber, yet his face was bright. When he smiled, the girls in the crowd and amidst the friend groups shrieked, which echoed in the large gathering area and took a toll on Betty's eardrums. "Isn't he amazing?" Pearl said. "What makes them so important?" Betty asked, with hands over her ears. Pearl gave her an expression of shock so wild, Betty might have thought she accidentally stepped on her foot. "Betty, you don't know." Gabrielle looked at her in shock as well. "You don't know they're the most famous family in all of the Americas? Dad's a politician, oldest son a movie star? Does the name Gunther's not ring any bells?" Pearl demanded. Why do you care so much, Pearl? Betty reacted. Why do you care to breathe? Pearl reacted. Was that a threat? Oh, the day I marry August. Pearl hugged the air as though she admired it. Don't you see it, Betty? Pearl is in love, Paisley said, giggling. Cassandra, I want you to do all that you can to get close to him. Once you make contact, I want you to ask him over for Christmas. Of course, Christmas will be at my house. Then I'll come in and accidentally bump into him. And how will you make him like you? Paisley added. Simple. I'll use Splinker perfume before I meet him. That's cheating, Pearl. You know you can't just put him under the influence with that smell. Don't you think you'll run out? Paisley said. Pearl glared. What makes you think I'll need more? He'll be in love with me before the bottle is half done. Hey, you five? A deep voice came from their right. A tall man in dark green overalls scowled at them. They all shrieked. No standing on benches, can't you read? Holding themselves together, they then looked at the sign on a pillar behind. We'll get off, so sorry, Paisley said to the man. Their view was now blocked by the heads of the much taller crowd. None of them wanted to attempt to cut through, so they left. She actually thinks her plan will work, Paisley whispered to Betty. I'll genuinely be surprised if she talks to him, let alone make contact. The five girls then made their way to a small cafe shop a few stores out from where the crowd still stood, Madame Fiv's. This cafe claims to make the best milkshakes in the Northeast. All but one agreed. Pearl objected to the idea, her excuse, excessive calories. Pearl, you're 13, I don't think that will be an issue for like another 5 years, Paisley said. Pearl eventually gave in, but not only to Paisley's comment but the sweet temptation across the glass counter in the bright blue shop. Gabrielle, Cassandra and Paisley chose chocolate. Betty received cotton candy, and Pearl, blueberry. Their milkshakes were rich in the colour of their respective flavours, diffused with sprinkles that glowed past the glass cup while a large white swirl finished on top. They sat at a corner table placed near the shop window. Betty embraced the cold, sweet taste of milky cotton. It was the third best thing she had all week. They all smiled and purred as they sipped their drinks. As their creamy, melting swirls lowered deeper into their glass cups, Pearl kept mixing her barely sipped blue milkshake while looking at passers through the cafe window. Something wrong? Gabrielle asked. You're right, I'm never going to Ilvermorny, Pearl said. Who said you were? Paisley said, but just as she finished her question, Betty hit her leg beneath the table. Okay, I'll be silent, Paisley whispered. Pearl, we all understand your pain, Betty said. You like him too? Pearl reacted. No, not that. I mean, we all understand how much you really want to go to Ilvermorny. Well, except for Paisley. Paisley glared at Betty. But some things don't always work out, I guess. Betty continued. At least we have each other. That's what really matters, right? Betty then placed her hand towards Pearl. We fall together, Pearl stuttered in her fragile voice. Paisley scoffed. You guys are acting like Thermadore is a prison. I promise you guys it's not. Hey guys! A chestnut-haired boy approached the friend group. Hey Ryan! They all responded. He looked exactly like how Betty remembered him 3 months ago back in Zaha's academy, a friendly, bright-faced boy who was relatively tall and skinny, yet looked strong enough to lift 2 of them up like he always did last year. It's nice to see you guys. Excited for Thermadore? Gabrielle said. Yeah, I can't wait to start Elementa. And his passions never changed. He was still obsessed with the sport. Wait, you made the team? Gabrielle reacted. Yeah, I transferred my Elementa credentials a month ago from my community team, and they told me I'm in. That's amazing, Ryan. Wish you luck, Paisley said. Thanks, you guys. See you at school then. See you then, Betty responded with a beaming smile. He then ran back to his family and got a milkshake of his own. Betty, why didn't you tell us you liked him? Gabrielle said. Betty nearly dropped her drink. Like him? In what way? I saw the way you looked at him. You seemed so happy around him, Gabrielle added. I was being nice, Betty reacted. Betty stared at the boy who now held a lime green milkshake and headed out the shop with his family. She really didn't understand how that all worked. Just like the Gunther boy all those girls screamed for back at the gathering area, she couldn't understand what made boys appealing. For her, Ryan was just another friend, not as close as her immediate four, but still a friend. "I want you all to do something for me," Pearl said. She stuck her hand out in the middle of the table. "What is this?" Paisley reacted. "Just stick out your hand." Each girl placed their hand near Pearl's. When Cassandra placed hers, Pearl slapped it away. "Ouch, what was that for?" "You're not going to Thermadore, Cassandra. This doesn't apply to you." Pearl then adjusted her hair before looking carefully at the three others. "Promise that we stick together the whole 5 years. No clubs, no activities, and no boys will separate us," Pearl declared. The three other girls looked at each other. What was she expecting was going to happen this upcoming school year? "I'm waiting." "We promise," the three girls said in unison. "And if they break it?" Cassandra wondered. "Let's not go there," Pearl said smugly. They all giggled. "Now that sounded like a threat," Paisley said. With the sweet taste of milkshakes to end their brief yet fun gathering, they headed to the main cafeteria of the mall where most of their families agreed to meet them. Pearl gave up defending Ilvermorny, which relieved Paisley. She was finally given the spotlight to talk about Thermadore. She rambled on about the school as though she had been there for ages, mentioning teachers, curriculums, and famous alumni. It didn't sound that different to what Paddy said a couple of nights ago. It even interested Cassandra, who not an hour ago boasted in expression and in word about Ilvermorny. Eventually, the friend group dispersed to their own families, not leaving without saying their goodbyes and a group hug. As Betty caught up to hers, she noticed the large amount of bags her parents had bought for Thorny. It nearly doubled her stuff. Whatever caused them to buy an irresponsible amount of additional items, Betty had a stinging suspicion it involved Thorny's crying that her friend spotted not long ago. The family, with their belongings, made their way to the fountain where they entered. "Janetta, the packages," Mother Grimes instructed. "Oh, right." Janetta grabbed a deep blue jean bag from one of her dress pouches. She then flicked her wand at the large pile of Betty's and Thorny's purchased items and floated them in the jean bag. With everything packed, Janetta grabbed the bag and placed it around her right shoulder. Betty giggled at the thought of Janetta complaining about back pain once they reached the car. The stairs that surrounded the fountain appeared, going down in the dark hall. As they reached the bottom, they were met by a woman cashier at the door. She guided them out towards the front. As the five left past the narrow opening, they noticed No Madge staring at them oddly. Father and Mother Grimes ignored them, but both girls gave smiles as they passed. Betty took a brief glimpse of the album covers, mesmerised by the beautiful art once more, before going through the shop entrance and headed down the stairs. As they headed towards their vehicle, Betty quickly ran to her father in front. "Dad, can we go back sometime?" Betty asked. "Back? Is there something we missed?" "No, I meant the No Madge shop." Father Grimes furrowed his eyebrows. He then gasped. "You want to see the No Madge music, don't you?" "Yes, that. Oh, Betty, No Madge music is out of this world." Betty gasped. "You've listened to some?" "Oh yeah, so much of it, just don't tell your mum." Betty briefly looked back at her mother, hoping their conversation wasn't being heard. Of course she was looking around, giving sidelong glances to the No Madge passing by. "There is a shop near home, maybe next summer we could visit." "It's a deal!" Betty leaned close to her father, smiling as they went through the crowd of No Madge. As soon as the doors of their home closed, Thorny demanded her things from Janetta. "Calm down, Thorny," Betty yelled. "Betty, it's okay," her mum reacted. Betty then kept quiet, but it didn't stop her from giving Thorny threatening stares when their eyes met. "Okay, girls." Janetta placed the jean bag on the coffee table. One by one, packages began flying out the bag and into a pile on the living room floor. She then went to the effort of separating the girls' belongings. "She's always been spoiled," Betty remarked. Janetta glared at her. "Betty, don't talk about your sister like that." Betty, with her arms folded, looked at her. "You know it's true, Janetta." In just 2 days, and with more generous help from Ginetta, Betty packed nearly everything in her trunk and suitcases. Thorny's stuff was packed as well, somehow fitting in the same amount of space as Betty's. "Betty, are you available?" Father Grimes asked. It was another grey, overcast morning, and Betty had been attending to her uniform. "Is it time?" she said. Father Grimes sighed. "I guess it is." She ran towards her father at the bedroom entrance, cheering. "I finally get it back." "You need to calm down first," he reacted. Betty tried to stand still as possible while attempting to hide her smile. "I'm calm." The two of them walked down the stairs towards a large cabinet near the kitchen. Betty couldn't hold it any longer. She shrieked. "Betty! I told you to be calm," Father Grimes reacted. "I'm sorry, Dad." Betty now really tried composing herself. Like everything else in the house, the cabinet was dark and intricate. It stood firm, nearly reaching the ceiling. For Betty, it was like a treasure chest ready to be opened. Father Grimes then went through a set of keys he held in his coat pocket. "If I'm correct, it should open. If not, it explodes," he said. He chose a key from the several in the ring and placed it in the lock. "Here it goes." As he turned the lock, a loud clicking noise went off. He winced. The two stood for a couple of seconds. Nothing. Father Grimes' face turned to relief. "My memory is still reliable. It was the golden leaf key." He replaced the lock and opened the large cabinet. There it was. The Grimes' most prized possessions. There were large piles of dragons at the bottom shelf. Above it, silver rings, rubies, and even a crown. At the centre, a large full-armour piece set, meant for a man twice the size of Father Grimes. It was at the top, where Betty stared hysterically. Pitched on wooden supports stood a dozen wands. There were white ones and blacks, really long ones, and short, stubby ones. Father Grimes grabbed a black 1 second of the first row. He then grabbed a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and wiped it down. Carefully, he delivered the wand to Betty. It felt heavier than Betty remembered, like a solid piece of metal. It wasn't an uncomfortable heft, but enough to make the wand feel expensive. The grip was an add-on, a knurled wood piece that slipped on the main structure. A gold pinstripe surrounded its smooth, glossy black oak surface. In between the pinstripe, her initials were etched on BG. It was a relatively long wand. The family planned for her to grow into it, which would make its length more manageable as she progressed through school. Betty then flicked the wand. Immediately, the cabin door slammed shut behind Father Grimes, nearly collapsing him on the floor. "Sorry, Dad, didn't mean to do that." Gaining his composure, he looked at her in awe. "I still don't understand how you do that, Betty. Even the best witches and wizards I've ever met aren't able to do that to a door, with so little effort." Paddy came for the last couple of days before the first day of school. She specifically wanted to be there to drop Betty off. Betty was most excited to show Paddy her uniform. She was amused, as expected, but Betty could also sense a bit of jealousy as well. "I wish I was that spoiled on my first day," Paddy reacted as she gazed at Betty fully dressed. "You didn't have good clothes?" Betty said. "I did, but it was very underwhelming." "Well, I hope my first day isn't the same." "It won't be, you look more put together," Paddy remarked. Ginetta came into Betty's room with a package in hand. "You got it?" Betty ran towards her. "How exciting!" Paddy reacted. As soon as Ginetta placed the package in her hand, Betty began ripping it open. Now, Betty, be careful with it." Betty felt soft, woolly fabric beneath the packaging paper. They were large black robes. She then stood up and pulled the robe out of the package. It reached the floor from her height. She lifted it up higher. It still touched the floor. Ginetta, I think you got the wrong size," Betty said. "Put it on," Paddy directed. "Didn't you hear, Paddy? It's too big." "Just put it on." Betty hesitated but did as directed. As she opened the woolly robe, she saw the bright yellow, silky innards. She placed it on herself as it was meant to fit. The robe still reached the floor. The sleeves didn't match her arms. If anything, it looked as though she put a large woolly blanket. Just wait, Betty, Paddy said. A second later, the robes started to shrink. Guys, what's happening? The robes eventually stopped when it was placed snug on her body. The sleeves were appropriately placed near her wrist, and the bottom a couple of inches from the ground, dangling high enough to expose her shoes and socks as they were meant to be. They fit perfectly, Betty reacted. Both Paddy and Janetta smiled. Betty began to rotate, pretending the robe was a dress. It lifted from the bottom. As Betty looked in the mirror, she noticed a thick yellow pinstripe that wrapped around the outside waist of her robe. Was that always there? Betty said. It's kind of a staple of Thermadore. I don't think any school does pinstripes that wrap around like that. Look at your chest, Paddy said. Betty looked. An insignia of the letter T embroiled itself on the dark fabric on the right side, glowing bright yellow under the sunlight beaming from the skylight. It's beautiful, Janetta reacted. Look at you, Betty, all ready for school. I'm so proud to be part of this. Janetta, you're family. We couldn't do this without you, Paddy remarked. Janetta smiled at both of them while a tear streaked down her cheek. Wait one sec. Paddy quickly ran past Janetta at the door and towards her room. Betty ran towards her desk to grab her wand. Hey, Betty! Janetta reacted. Be careful. I'll be, Janetta. Betty was mesmerised by the craftsmanship of the wand. In her mind, she went through the many spells she learned her first 2 years at Zahar's academy. So much to learn, she couldn't wait till she was old enough to carry it full time. Paddy ran back into the bedroom, dressed in her wizarding robes. Rather than black, it was bright yellow and a black pinstripe wrapped around the waist. Is that what happens to them when you graduate? Betty reacted. You're catching on, Paddy declared. The design was nearly the same as Betty's. The Thermadore insignia changed to black while the silky innards were milky white. One day those robes will change to this. Oh, I'm so excited for you, Betty. I'm excited too, Betty smiled at her. Oh, by the way, the robes have a built-in pocket for your wand. Really? Betty looked in her robes. There it was, a tiny slip. She placed her fingers in the hole. She couldn't reach the bottom, of course. There is one problem, Betty remarked. Yes? Paddy said. It looks like it's meant for right-handed wielders.